This video is freeware, so you can use it as you wish.
Electrified.
In April, the president promised to lift the state of emergency clamped on the country for 30 years. He said he'd bring in reform. But to the people of Daraa, these seemed just hollow promises. By now, the revolt had spread to many of the towns surrounding Daraa. Demonstrators defied the army snipers on the rooftops. Every Friday after the prayers, the protests swelled. One woman living in America would be confronted by the horror of those days. She'd been visiting her family in Isra near Daraa and had seen the crackdown.
My father used to cry every day when he watched the news. He was very scared about me, about the family and stuff, so he told me I should leave the country.
Back in the States on April the 22nd, Hala logged into her Facebook. By chance, she found a mobile phone video. Army snipers had killed 25 protesters in Isra, one of them an 8-year-old child. The pictures are too graphic to show.
Look at that kid.
Hala then realized one of the wounded was her father.
This is my father. Look at him. He passed away in the video. Like, I saw him when he passed away. That video makes me very upset and angry because I know my father. My father is a very brave man, very honest, and he was shot 3 times and he doesn't know anything about politics.
The soldiers enforcing President Assad's will rarely speak. But in Turkey, I met an army sniper who'd been sent to Daraa. Wasim defected and lives in fear of his life. We can't show his face. But I saw his military ID. Wasim thought he was defending his country.
The officers were telling us there were armed gangs, part of a foreign conspiracy. We said we want to go to Isra, to Daraa. We want to clean it up and kill the terrorists.
Syrian state television was showing pictures from Daraa. They said these armed men were protesters. But when Wasim got to the city, he discovered these gangs were the shabiha, or ghosts. They're thugs recruited to do the army's dirty work and act as agents provocateurs.
The officers said to us, there are armed groups, but don't shoot at them. They belong to us. There are no rebels or conspirators, only the people. Shoot the people. But we didn't want to.
Wasim's unit was sent to Isra, under orders to shoot to kill. One soldier who refused was never seen again.
Some of us, we didn't shoot at the people. We were shooting at the walls and up in the air. There was a unit behind us, soldiers from the 4th Division, which is loyal to Maha al-Assad. I mean, if you didn't shoot, they would shoot you from behind. They'd have killed us.
Wasim knew he had to get out. He escaped with 20 others from his unit and fled across the border. Other soldiers weren't so lucky, as Omar, the activist from Daraa, showed me.
These soldiers refused to open fire on civilians. They shoot them from behind. It's about 12 soldiers. Here we have 8.
And the people of Daraa are helping them?
Yes, the civilians helping them.
And these soldiers, what happened to them?
Now, these soldiers, some of them fled out of the country, some of them hiding even now, and I guess some of them dead.
Ultimately, it will be the army which will determine the fate of this Arab uprising too.
Syria is not like Egypt or Libya, where the army, or a significant part of it, sided with the people, forcing out a dictator. Syria's army has been carefully tailored over the years to make sure the Assad regime stays in power.
To understand more, I was off to meet one of the highest-ranking defectors, a Sunni like most people in Syria. Unlike him, 90% of the officers in the security forces are Alawite. They're from the same minority sect as the president's family, and they're die-hard Assad loyalists. I waited in a safe house. The colonel is a wanted man. He just announced online that he and other Sunni officers were forming a rebel army.
وانطلاقا من مسؤولية الجيش لحماية هذا الشعب الأعزل الحر نعلن عن تشكيل الجيش السوري الحر.
I sympathized with the revolution from the start. I was under constant surveillance. They have spies in all the military barracks.
The colonel and the captain with him confirmed that atrocities by the security forces were taking place in Daraa and throughout Syria. I asked him who was responsible.
Bashar al-Assad is responsible because he is the head of the regime and of the state, and no decree can be issued without his authorization. This is well known by the Syrian army. It's a dictatorship.
More and more defectors' videos have appeared online. Thousands of soldiers are thought to have abandoned their units and joined the protesters. But with so many Assad loyalists, it will be hard to get the army to reach a tipping point.
We're counting on defections. There are larger numbers occurring every day. But we know that this regime cannot be taken out without using force. We're now preparing for this stage. You understand? If they don't agree to give up power peacefully, we'll take them out by force.
But until that happens, the army will continue to be Assad's instrument of repression. On April the 25th, the security forces were ordered to begin the siege of Daraa. Tanks sealed off the streets. Homes were blasted with artillery as the whole city was punished for its defiance. Water, food and electricity were cut off. Bodies were stored in refrigerated trucks. It was too dangerous to go out and bury them. Four days after the siege began, villagers around Daraa tried to break the blockade and bring food to the town. Again, the security forces opened fire, even though there were many children in the crowd. Nawal al-Shari begged her son not to join the march that day. 15-year-old Tama, like many of Daraa's children, had been inspired to join the revolution.
His conscience wouldn't let him accept the bloodshed. He kept going out, protesting with the people. Every child and every woman in Syria rose up.
Dozens of people were killed that day and scores arrested. Nawal's son was one of them. Tama was taken to the intelligence headquarters in Damascus.
There was a witness inside the prison who saw and heard him while he was being tortured. He was calling out for help and shouting, "God, freedom, Syria." That's all he said.
When Tamer's body was returned to the family 5 weeks later, he'd been beaten. His neck was broken, he had bullet wounds, and he'd been mutilated.
All my son's features were gone. He wasn't my son, who used to be a handsome prince in my eyes. How can I describe how he looked? I mean, don't they have children? Aren't they human like us?
The torture and killing of Tamer and one of his school friends brought new impetus to the revolution. Across Syria, 100 children have been killed by the security forces. A defiant regime brought its supporters onto the streets of Damascus in June. The president offered a national dialogue, but the killing went on. We asked the Syrian government for an interview about the human rights abuses in the country, but they did not respond. The pictures taken in Daraa, however, tell their own story. A UN investigation has found there's been widespread and systematic attacks against civilians by Syria's security forces.
Many people now believe that President Assad and his henchmen should be in the dock at the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity.
Hala, whose father was killed by an army sniper, is the first Syrian to try and take a case against the regime to The Hague.
We have to stop the killing. We need to remove that president. I will keep fighting to the end of it until I see him in the International Criminal Court to justice.
When Colonel Gaddafi was ousted in August, Daraa took heart. But Syria's Arab Spring is now approaching winter. It will last much longer than Libya's or Egypt's. The international community has condemned the Assad regime and imposed sanctions, but there's no appetite for military intervention, and it's not what the people of Daraa want.
We need the international community to surround the regime from outside, because if you cut the financial sources on them, they don't have money to pay for their thugs and their criminals.
After 5 months, the army still occupies Daraa. Local activists say at least 600 people have died and 3,000 are missing in the area. The latest pictures smuggled out show the activists are still gathering evidence, still writing graffiti, demanding an end to the regime.
Daraa's people have suffered, but they're still resisting. God will grant them victory. It started in Daraa, and the regime's end will come in Daraa.
Inshallah.
The people of Daraa say they won't stay silent, they won't give up, whatever the price they have to pay in blood. Next week, as the national minimum wage rises above £6 an hour, Panorama goes undercover, revealing how some employers are getting round the rules to rip off workers.
It's witnessed some of Scotland's most dramatic moments. Fiona Bruce visits a snow-bound palace of Holyrood in Edinburgh. The Queen's Palaces follow next.
See perhaps also. Info evidence, 24th April 2005. After the first and the second contact. See, if possible, these videos. Only 22 days passed. And then,